Hello, welcome back to the library. I'm Dvorak, and you are watching How to Destroy a Legacy in One Fell Swoop. Today's chapter deals with Contra, Legacy of War, released for the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn in November of 1996, as an early Christmas present to fans, which would be more than just a month earlier than the 10th anniversary of the original Contra being released in arcades. A funny little fact I didn't know until doing this video was that Contra has a splintered timeline. Apparently, the NES game Contra Force, followed up by the Sega Genesis style Contra Hardcore, is where the split occurs. Legacy of War falls in this alternate timeline. In this adventure, our hero Ray, who oddly enough is from Hardcore, returns to take down the evil Colonel Bassad. Turns out our little dictator buddy friend purchased himself an alien embryo from the Alien Wars. Ignoring that this means the timelines are connected somehow, the leader used the baby alien to mass produce an entire army of little Bassads. Or bastards, take your pick. To help fight the good fight, Ray brings along Tasha, a no-nonsense, heavily armored female. CD-288 is an assassin Cybot whose origin story reads like someone rewrote the Wayland part of the Aliens lore. The final member, Bubba, is an alien of unknown origin who, thankfully, speaks our language and was named after some human technician's boredom. I wish I was making that up. If you can hear the slight tinge of sarcasm in my voice, that's because it's not slight. This comes from a very personal bias, but Contra is one of the few game series on this planet that never needed a story, or character development, or whatever in the good Lord's name is happening in the manual for this game. It feels like the dev team was trying way too hard to create lore, or at least tie the characters to an established lore with Ray as the anchor. It's Contra. Outside of changing the date the aliens invade, the tried and true "it's up to you and your team to stop the invasion" would have worked just fine, and saved you on paper. This ridiculous need to establish some sort of grounding for the timeline gives way to a bigger problem. Being the first entry in the series to evolve in 3D graphics, yet not completely commit to the bit. In what was likely an attempt to pay homage to the game's origins, the heroes and base alien troops are still 2D sprites, flat renders of 3D models. All medium to large-sized enemies are in full 3D polygons. Well, mostly basic 3D models, but we were still early in the PlayStation's career. Regretfully, the mishmash of both graphic styles plays out in a bizarre, almost school lesson example of how not to merge conflicting art styles. While the game's levels are detailed, the larger enemies look overly simplistic compared to everything else on screen. Laser weapons look like children's toys. Tanks and smaller vehicles look stiff and lost among their chosen backgrounds. Worse still, the aliens are all over the place. In developer Appaloosa's darkest hour, they felt the need, or were directed by Konami, to reference almost every piece of Contra history they could. The series was known for pushing its 2D sprites to the limits, from screen-shaking giant alien torsos to wall-tearing roboskeletons, to the eye-pleasing insanity of everything Hardcore did. Even the NES stretched its limits with Contra Force's multi-layering effects. When you don't have the hardware dialed in, bad things can happen in early 3D. To present the most personal attack, let's go back to the Super Nintendo's Tortoise. Look at this thing. Mode 7 infused, taking up half the screen, visual effects, drone enemies, and attacks to take care of all at once. That boss fight is 35 years old as the recording of this video, and it's still fresh in my memory. So you can imagine my shock, dismay, and loss for words when Legacy of War's version showed up. Look at it. They turned him into a hungry hippo with a weight problem. The pulsing, almost brain-like legs are now just square textures. His crazy skeletal shell was reduced to a boulder with a door. There's no terror here, no sense of awe, just astonishment at what was allowed to release. Sadly, this brings us to the tour of the game as a whole, so let's start the dissection in earnest. Keep in mind, I'm only hiding a select few for the sake of time because we could be here all day. Urban Warfare starts the party off, and it was clearly a nod to the Super Nintendo street levels with Mode 7. As you make your way to the mid-boss, That's a double reference to the original Contra's first stage boss and Alien War's minor hurdle. The problem here is pretty much everything. Jungle camouflage in the middle of a city with what looks like tuning forks for weapons. Oddly enough, it's also a perfect example of the game's biggest flaw: targets requiring you to jump. Throughout the series, most enemy weak points required a stream of bullets, an occasional dodge, or at the very least, a pattern to sort out and overcome. The majority of Legacy of War's gameplay shortcomings can be boiled down to Appaloosa not understanding this. In the two previous iterations, there would have been a rock to rest against while you aim up, or a platform to lie down on and unload your clip into. On the PlayStation, you need to keep jumping and shooting like you're bored. Once past that, it's off to destroy what looks like a not quite there re-envisioning of the NES Snowfield Spike vehicle. Look at that poor thing, it's a Lego set. Once more running through the streets, you're brought face to face with a constantly moving enemy that, yeah, you need to jump and shoot at. It was at this very enemy that I stopped playing Contra Legacy of War over 30 years ago, so you can imagine my surprise when I realized how smart of a choice it was when doing this review in the present day. As you make your way to the river, there's a moving raft section that feels like a nod to the boating stage in Contra Hardcore. There's also a peculiar water boss that assembles itself from multiple pieces of junk, which I thought might have been a nod to the Junker bot from Hardcore. However, it might have been a nod to the former Konami employees over at Treasure. The junk robot's multiple moving parts and reconfiguration take a nod from Gunstar Heroes' multi-force enemy more than anything else. Once you reach the end of the jungle, you come across this nightmare. It looks like a super simplified version of the door enemy from the first Contra. But like the turtle before it, it looks like a child's drawing of what they think the boss looks like. It was at this point that any hope I had of the game redeeming itself flew right out the window. The final two references I'll dredge up here in homages comes to the form of a boss rush in the upper cliffs, where it looks like the devs desperately wanted to rekindle some sort of memory. There's one enemy that looks like stacks of cash crawling around, which I realized on my second playthrough that they're eyeballs. There's a second big-ass bug for no reason, followed by some blue worm, and then the saddest nod to the original Contra Guardian ever. Reduced from a giant jumping nemesis to a mannequin that kind of reassembles itself, sort of. After that, late in the game, you jump into a virtual world a la Contra Hardcore again, which is where I gave up the goose. Besides being the tired cliche of fight every boss ever again, the programmers appear to have left a message in the floor grids, but there's so much going on that it's kind of hard to read what it said. I think it's supposed to be "come with me to hell," but two of the words seem flipped. Once you take down the final virtual enemy, you find yourself on what was likely the inspiration for Super Mario Galaxy. Said as a joke, Nintendo, don't take me down. As you battle around a tiny little planet blowing up space worms crawling out of their little space holes. Don't ask me how you got there. Once you blow them all up good, the ending cinema shows your squad standing on a chunk of rock with no breathing apparatus or spacesuits in space, just casually floating back to the galaxy. How did they get there? How are they getting home? There's nothing out there. The final nail in the coffin of grievances comes with how the player death is handled. You're given a set of lives, except there's no animation of you getting hurt. You just blink and grunt. I ran into my first game over and hadn't even realized I had been hit the entire time. Now, that isn't to say Legacy of War doesn't have any good points, or that it's even a truly bad game. In fact, it would be criminal to ignore the highlights. The music is really good, with some notes tuned to sound like they're coming out of the Super Nintendo rather than a high-end CD player. Second, there are plenty of hidden walls that reveal bountiful weapon caches, which allow you to do a bit more exploration and poke around than you would in other Contra games. Third, if you play on the easy difficulty, you don't lose your extra weapons when you get hit. This is likely the only real way to play the game, as otherwise you never get the chance to appreciate or even use the weapons since you keep getting hit. Lastly, buried in the second mission is a nice little nod to arcade history. If you wander into the little hut, 2 arcade games can be played. One is a nod to Gyrus, and the other is pretty much Pac-Man, though there may be another Konami game this is actually referencing, but I'm not fully appreciating Konami's history here. There are 2 nice little breaks from the chaos in the main game, and they can also be accessed directly from the title screen via Programmer's Cheat. There is one last little gimmick. If you had gotten this game on launch day, they included 3D glasses. Turning the option on in-game would have had the visuals rapidly flicker between red and blue filters, allowing for a subtle 3D movie to take effect. While the trick lands in some cases, it's not consistent enough to be worth the trouble after your first use of it. When it comes to reviewing Contra Legacy of War, the game's identity crisis comes heavily into focus. If this were just some no-name IP, it'd be viewed as a decent entry into the genre, but with nothing to push it over the top. However, it clearly says Contra on the packaging, and that lens takes on a whole new impact. It is a decent entry into the series. However, there's no real true path back to the games that allowed it to exist in the first place. You know a game's livelihood has meaning, even if the wrong meaning, when your facial reaction to finishing it is worth a selfie. I can still remember the sense of emptiness, confusion, and speechlessness I felt when I first ran through it 4 months ago. In replaying it again for the review, those emotions are subdued in favor of making it a case study. Just because you slap a name on something doesn't mean it's that product, and Konami knows this firsthand decades later. On the review scale, as a nameless entity, it'd be a good game at like a 6 out of 10. As an heir to the Contra throne, it's a disappointing 4 out of 10. We'll split the difference and call it what it is. Highly average. Have you played Legacy of War or the follow-up See Contra Adventure? What's your favorite Contra game across any system? Post below and let's get the conversation started. Play games, stay safe, and I'm here when you need me. See you next video. Take care.